Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by thanking the Arts Humanities Research Council for funding us to create these workshops. And the point is that we hope to create resource of interdisciplinary perspectives on restorative justice that you can all draw upon and share with your colleagues and students. So the point of recording it is so that it's very open. I'd start by saying I met Michael about 5 years ago at a Design Outcry conference, and my colleague Adam Thorpe, who's designer who's here today, said, isn't it strange, when we listen to the method of restorative justice, it sounds just like what we do in design, and it's a very similar process. And it occurred to me that we needed a discussion, and my colleague Jonathan Martin, who's had a performance at Central St Martin's Italy too, we had a discussion between us to figure out how the different ways we work, which might seem unlikely, has synergy. And so the point of today is really to discuss the methods. So I'm going to talk briefly about empathy and trying to move into the way restorative justice is already happening in the arts. We work with restorative practitioners, and to show you some of those projects, and I hope that if you don't know them, they'll be of interest and use to you. So Michael's already eloquently explained what is empathy, but Roman Kanarik's work is very helpful. The definition about stepping into somebody else's shoes is very straightforward. But Roman's work is really aimed, he's from the School of Life, which is a philosophical group. He argues, using empathy to start a revolution. And his argument is more empathy will make society better. And I have issues with his take, and I want to come to it. So the question I start with is, does empathy have the power to transform relationships from the personal to the political? And can it operate as a catalyst that could create fundamental social change? Well, Kanarik believes it can. And research suggests that empathy is a good place to start for motivating pro-social behaviour. And the opposite, when there's a lack of empathy, what you get is antisocial behaviour. And that's a really big declaration, because society is full of many complex issues that impact, is it just our personal experience of empathy? And it seems to me that restorative justice offers a similar promise. And my view is that, if we're going to make this real, then we really truly need to understand empathy better. So the two definitions, again, that Michael's drawn upon are the notion of cognitive empathy, meaning to understand, theory of mind. The most of psychology, which I'm not an expert in, but I did an interdisciplinary PhD, so I know some of it. The theory of mind suggests that some people are unable to understand what's going on or to make judgments about what's going on in somebody's head. Some people do it very well, of course. And there are two parts to empathy, two definitions, and they're intertwined. The second part is not just to understand, but to feel. And the feeling, an appropriate vicarious emotional response, which is linked to effective empathy, which is defined by Hoffman, means that you can be compassionate. You will appropriately respond. And there are issues about having too much effective empathy, and I'll come back to that. Now, I really like the work of Simon Baron-Cohen, and probably most of you know. He talks about 0 degrees of empathy. And there are many theories of empathy. It's an area that's growing, not just because of neuroscience. There's a lot of interest in it. But his work, and he's special, he's a Cambridge professor of psychopathology. He's probably a world expert, well, certainly Britain's expert on autism. And he argues three things. First of all, that empathy is not equally distributed in individuals. Second, that those who experience it don't always experience it in the same way or in the same amount. And he talks about 0 degrees of empathy, people who are impaired. And he suggests that 0 degrees of empathy is a much more useful notion than evil. It's a much easier way of understanding how to deal with what happens when people don't have any empathy. And so his work, there's loads of papers, and actually he's a very charismatic. I really like his talks. You can find him on TED, on the Forgiveness Project. There's lots of videos on YouTube that I really recommend. But he talks about the way that people with autism really struggle to understand other people's intentions, thoughts and motives. And that, you know, I don't know if any of you have experience of autism, people withdraw, it's a very debilitating. And he says, yeah, their affective empathy is not always completely compromised, and that if you tell the child or the adult that they've hurt somebody, they're very upset and they want to make right. Whereas he suggests that, and he uses the bell curve, and he's researched, I know Robin hates the bell curve, I knew you'd laugh, but he talks about, in terms of autism, he has done the actual statistics. He talks about, you know, sort of a range of different experiences, but what he gets to is this, is that he says that in autism, it's usual that the cognitive empathy is effective, but actually the affective empathy is not so effective. And in psychopaths, it's the opposite. So his argument is, and lots of people have issues, like, you know, I'm very concerned about using words like psychopath. I've read John Monson, and I realise that there's quite a lot of, you know, popular fiction about psychopaths. But his argument is that in the research that he has undertaken, and he's a professor of psychopathology, that there is an impairment in affective empathy that can be measured. And I found that personally, in trying to get my brain around what empathy is, I found that quite, looking at different spectrum, quite a useful difference. He also suggests, and for me, you know, my background is cultural studies, he suggests that obedience to an authority figure can impact on temporary lapses of empathy, and also that ideology can affect empathy. And for me, that's the big issue. Okay, I think that it's not enough to say someone's a psychopath or they're impaired. For me, I want to understand, you know, what made this person, what culture produced it. And in the world, you know, we have done terrible things in the name of science. So with the eugenics movement, which is a particular type of thought, 65,000 Americans with learning disabilities were sterilised before the Second World War. And Winston Churchill, you know, that hero, was one of the people in the UK that tried to pass the bill here. The law in Sweden for compulsory sterilisation, as you all probably know, didn't change until 1977. It was actually 78 the law actually changed, but up until 77 they were still sterilising people. And we know in terms of history that when there's sort of a range of ideologies that, you know, we have nations that have shown little empathy for others, you know, Nazi Germany, Rwanda, ISIS, and I'm going to move on. And the question I want to ask you is a political question, really. It's the topic of the day. So it's about Ched, poor Ched. Okay. Now, is Ched suffering from abnormal psychology or sexist ideology in his attitude towards women? Is it that that's resulted in his inability to apologise to the 19-year-old woman he was convicted of raping? I know that yesterday he changed his website, so I checked, and he has now said, his only apology was to his girlfriend, and he's now saying on his website that he's sorry for what's happened to the young woman because of the attention. He has not apologised for raping her, and for me, this is a very big issue, because it seems to me that he has a lack of empathy that I can only explain in terms of ideology. His father-in-law or, you know, girlfriend's father appears to be supporting him. He seems to be surrounded by people who feel his proudness at football is much more significant than what he's done. I do believe in rehabilitation. I would like to see Ched get another job as a footballer, but I would like to see him give half of his salary actually to dealing with issues of consent in young men and actually being a role model. So I'm not against him. I'm just against him having no sort of response, or perhaps no remorse. And so, what is empathy? So let's get back to the talk. So research from teaching has shown that it's more difficult for us to empathise with when there are differences. So that when we're different culture, different religion, different language, different skin colour, you know, anthropologists talk about ethno-cultural empathy, and they argue that empathy increases if somebody is more like you. I think there's an issue of class actually that's unstated in the way the coverage of the Ched Evans case is. Maybe that's an issue that could be looked at. But certainly I think that when we use this notion of empathy, we need to be very careful about, you know, ascribing psychology as a defining characteristics without looking at culture, because obviously the culture that we live in is problematic. People talk about we get the crime that we deserve. Perhaps we also get, as culturally, the empathy that we deserve in terms of the things that we think. Now, of course, the environment is important, and there is a nature-nurture connection. You know, empathy is taught and learned. Feeling love and affection has massive, massive experience to the individual in informing who they are, as does maltreatment and abuse. And John Balby's work, he's from Tavistock, was very, very significant in helping us to understand attachment theory. And so, you know, what I'm talking about then is cultural ideas, I'm talking about biology, and I'm talking about the experience and the internal capacity of empathy. And there seem to be 3 biological factors that are shown in research to impact upon empathetic development. They include genetics. So basically, scientists who have reviewed this argue there is MAC8 gene that's linked to delinquency, and that is exacerbated if they have had a very hard time growing up. That hormones, prenatal testosterone, is shown to affect brain development. So Baron Cohen's own work is that they took the amniocentesis fluid and with the permission, obviously, of those that they engaged with. And at age 8, those children that showed high in the testosterone results were then measured for emotional responses. And the argument is that they show less ability to read faces and emotions, so there is a biological impact. And also there's brain structure. We know that if somebody who's been highly empathetic, highly connected person has an accident and it affects their brain afterwards, that they may not have the same empathy. So there are many factors, so we can't blame one thing. But what I would say is let's not get too excited about empathy because, and I disagree with Canary to some extent, that actually from nursing, when we look at nursing studies, there's an argument that too much empathy makes it impossible for people to do their job. Actually, that too much affective empathy. Whilst cognitive empathy is useful because it enables you to connect, the professional distance to stop burnout that's required is talked about in a lot of nursing studies as being significant. And so what I wanted to move on to now is that, this idea of basis design, it's whether design and designers can make a contribution. Can empathy be learned or enhanced? Baron Cohen's work suggests that it might be able to be enhanced and taught. Here are some of the tools that he uses. He has 2 projects. One's called the Transporter, one's called MindRead. They're actually probably very similar, but they're about teaching children who don't know how to do it to predict the correct emotion. So they literally work with kids, in schools to get them to respond to emotions, so they learn that. And it's the bigger project has thousands of images to enable that to happen. There are many other empathy tools, and this is what I wanted to share with you today. So I have many of you heard of the Roots of Empathy project, which is where it started in Canada. We now have it in the UK. They take babies into classrooms and they get the kids to predict what the baby is thinking. And evidently it has a very strong positive reaction in building social and emotional competence. There's the Human Library, where a project that started where you can phone up and you can arrange for somebody to come to, usually to your school, to talk about their experience. And it could be somebody who's climbed a mountain, it could be somebody who's survived Auschwitz. But the argument is that the way to build competence is to put people together to build those connections. There's the Blind Cafe. I went with my colleague Adam, actually, to a client, where you basically have an experience of being blind, so that you really feel the food, you really understand. And it's to actually, help you really, I suppose, experience what the blind experience. There's the parents' circle, which probably those of you who work with conflict management that will be more aware of, which is a families forum, so that if your son is killed in Palestine, you will speak and be counselled by somebody in Israel who's lost their son. And the argument is that this is a way of achieving sustainable peace. There's the Forgiveness Project that I'm sure many of you are aware of, because some colleagues here from Christchurch have created tools for this project. And I do think there is an issue about forgiveness, which is part of the restorative process. that, you know, there's actually feeling that you need to say sorry, but there is also receiving, being forgiven. And that, I think it's a very interesting project to look at. And what happens is that the stories of the victims are absolutely essential to this discussion. And for me, I think the exhibition that's offered by the project is a very valuable thing. Now, designers have worked with empathy. You know, most of the products that you buy or you're wearing or you have in your house have been designed by somebody who's been thinking about designing with empathy. But actually, in the 1980s, Patty Moore, who's pictured there, she dressed up, she got herself done up by a Hollywood friend who could do makeup, and she lived for 2 years as a senior. And she said that she was appalled at the way she was treated, and what she realised, she did it because she was working for a really large design corporation, and she wanted to feed back for them the fact that their products, from drills to doors to toilets, didn't work, and that they weren't inclusive. And she's part of what's now called the Universal Inclusive Design for Ability movement. And, you know, since she did that, there have been massive improvements in design that address a much more holistic focus. And the Agnes suit, which is now worn by people designing cars, makes those young designers who are trying to design the cars feel what it's like to be our age or my age, you know, where it's harder to move around and not as fast. And to design with empathy, not just for empathy. And there's suits, obesity suits, which are obvious, pregnancy suits. So designers have been looking. And so in our own college, what we did, we set an empathy project. Now, normally I work with industrial design. I've taught industrial design for 20 years. And the students, if I say, look, there's a problem on the buses, the driver's in a hurry, and the woman's got a pram, and he wants to get the pram on, and then the pram's like pushing everybody out of the way, their first response would be to design a fold-up pushchair, because they would argue they're trying to solve the problem. But when we set this project, Adam and I did this, we didn't want them to design to solve the problem. We wanted them to design so that each person in the conflict could understand each other. So we asked them to find a group they could work with and find some conflict. So the first conflict that came up was snoring, and which is like not a big conflict unless you live with somebody who snores and you can't sleep. And so what they designed was a phone that woke up the snorer like 20 times a night, so he got what it was like, and it was a he that in the group. And for the woman, she was given this sort of like torture device to put on her nose, because that's what she bought for her husband to wear. And so that they got each other what each other were feeling, and to start a conversation. So these objects, they're not solutions, they're things to start a conversation. So they're almost like an object, but the request for an assembly or discussion. And there were a number of those products. So this one, Newsflash, enables you to read what it's like to be a demonised group. So if you read about Muslims at the present time, you know, you might not notice the slant. So if I'm from East London, so if I read each time East Londoner, you know, was whatever, maybe I'd respond differently. And what this program that Kid Designed can do is actually get you, before you start reading, to change it. So you put in this like piece of information, and it creates it for you, so that you realise how other people are represented. This one was designed for two people in conflict, which was the person wearing the veil and the passport officer. And I think that some of the students are present who are now running their own businesses, but were part of this project. But basically, the passport officer is asked to, is given a postcard and asked to take his trousers off. And the woman wearing the veil is given a postcard like that and asked to pick which one might be her. And so that it's to raise a discussion. And obviously this work is experimental and not complete. This one was designed by a student who was trying to encourage us not to be negative. And so Polly will pick up, it's a toy parrot, and it will pick up on negative words. So basically it's on a perch in your office, and it repeats to you all the negative things you say in a day, so that you help yourself. you know, and none of these projects were actually, you know, final projects. They were the beginning of an experiment. I'm very keen to do more work, and so with my team. Roman Canary talks about the fact that the world needs an empathy museum, an experimental adventure palace for stepping into the place of another. And I really think so. I'd really like to see one in every prison in Britain. I think that, you know, there's so much that could be done by finding new ways to experience empathy, to sort of divert people really to what's happening. Because often when you're being told off and you're told you're not empathetic, it's not exactly going to produce more empathy. And it seems to me that it's not just what we do, it's how we do it that needs thought. And so I wanted to show you how already art and design is helping restorative justice engage with empathy. And we've become, as a team, interested in the way visual material and creative practice can influence subjectivity and empathy in different ways. I work with the National Alliance of Arts in the Criminal Justice System, which is about 600 businesses who go into prison to work the arts. And one of the findings I became aware of was, this is Andy from the Clean Break Theatre Company. The work theatre in prison is amazing. I mean, we all know that the Mail on Sunday will say that prisoners have, you know, too much gym, you know, too much telly. And if I suggest they need the arts as well, you can just see the outrage at that. But actually, the work these guys do is groundbreaking. And, you know, I'll just give you a short, sorry. Oh, damn. Andy described, sorry, the slide's gone, I don't know what happened. But Andy described a project. He worked in prison with sex offenders, and basically they set up the stage so that there are people this side with the stage in the middle. And he said that what was the most fabulous about dealing with sexual violence on the stage was not just the actors got the audience of sex offenders to experience what was going on, but they could see, by looking at their colleagues in front of them, that they were being affected too, and that it was all right to cry, and it was all right not to keep on the prison mask and to let go of some of the stuff that I think builds empathy. And I'm aware of projects like Good Vibrations that goes on in prison, which is it's a gamelan music workshop, which what it is that there's about 30 instruments, and that the coordinator gets the inmates to basically learn from each other, to understand, you know, each other's mood, to actually empathise with them in order to make a tune. And within an afternoon, they usually start to make music. And within a term, it's amazing what's produced by those projects. Then another project that I've been particularly taken back in terms of the restorative process is the Philadelphia Arts Project. Basically, the mayor of Philadelphia 30 years ago was sick and tired of Philadelphia looking like this, and young men being sent regularly to prison for crimes of vandalism. And so what he did was he set up a programme which was aimed at graffiti or anti-graffiti, but was to work in and outside of prison in a restorative way. That was to get the young men to engage, and it was mainly young men, to engage with the communities, to understand what the communities might want. And they produced the most fantastic art. Some of the massive murals have actually been made in prison, and so they're done on canvas and they're actually put up over the wall. Some are actually with the ex-offenders coming out, working with the community to put something back. And the programme's run for 30 years and has had produced many successes. This is a baseball player who wanted to be shown in a suit. Basically, I think all these projects engage with communities in ways so that they can experience art on a day-to-day basis. Ex-offenders that participate are required to consider the perspective of how others feel as to create the artwork. Those who are viewing the artwork are informed that it's co-created by ex-offenders. And what I understand from the Kersner Foundation is that by taking prisoners into the gallery, it enables the officers, the prison officers who are working with them, to understand, but also the public to see the world differently. So I'm very taken with this work. And the Philadelphia project in particular was was about trying to take a dirty city where the young were actually being demonised and put in prison, and to make it a colourful city where people were included and connected, to try and build bridges and to force, rather than forcing people to engage with each other. And certainly, in my opinion, restorative justice can't happen unless there is a true desire in the individual, so the perpetrator, to ask for reparation, who wants to pay something back, who wants to change. And I think that it makes me wonder about proxy processes. I know most of you who work with restorative justice have a value of bringing the offender and the victim together. And I see that as a valuable process. But I wanted to have proxy processes where we learn about others and see life from their point of view, or indirectly. I wonder how they can have value. It seems to me that creative practice does find that there is something else that can be done. And I think that how we build empathy before crime occurs, how we can use proxy processes if the victim finds it unacceptable to meet the perpetrator. How could those in prison be further educated in imaginative and creative ways is certainly something that we should explore further in order to develop, I suppose, more compassion. And so my final section is to talk about what we can learn from each other in other disciplines. What can we learn? I think that one of the things we can learn is that coercion doesn't work to provoke change in anybody. The Scared Straight programme that you might be aware of failed. It failed because it just didn't work. And the effect of the programme has been questioned in 2002 and 2012, indicating that not only did it fail to deter crime, actually it led to more offending behaviour. And I think the programme is still running in some places. Is that true, Robin? So that's quite a worry. We have this sort of, I suppose, top-down approach about how some people think change might happen. And I think what we can learn from programmes like this is that it doesn't work. Neuroscience is important too, and I know that other speakers will speak about this, but what it's saying generally is that our brains, our amygdalas, are capable of extraordinary change. And given the right opportunities, that brains can learn new info and new behaviours. So it seems to me that that's something that we should build from as a positive. If the brain can grow neural pathways after an injury, could we help the brain develop or regain morality even in prison? It seems to me what prison does is the opposite of this, that we inculcate people in regimes that are absolutely negative, that make people very hard, suppress emotion, and that we should do the opposite. And so I think that Roman Kanarik's suggestion for an empathy museum is something that, for empathy projects that the theatre and the arts deliver is absolutely vital for prison. And the people who are doing this work are the Kessler Foundation, the National Arts Alliance for Criminal Justice, who talk very well, and Jessica Plant talks about it's much more than like being worthy, taking art by prisoners and doing it in a worthy way, aren't they good? It's about showing the world of the mind of other people in different places and trying to have that discussion. Because, as you know, it's a very difficult problem in society to rehabilitate. I think the Forgiveness Project has really useful tools. Dr. Mazzy Noor has created some, I believe he's from this centre. And for me, I think the Forgiveness Project has, I think it's a really big issue for restorative justice, about whether it's possible to forgive. What Marina Cantacusino says is that the only way to oppose is by to your enemy, if you have a notion of an enemy, is by forgiving them. And so that you get back the strength that you thought that was taken from you. Basically, I think that what we can do here is share our different approaches, and the ambition of this programme is simply to look at what tools are out there and to create some interdisciplinary connections and alliances to bring about restorative change. So my final slide is just saying that the recordings of these talks will be available to you, and there are lots of references that we can all share. Some of the ones that I found very useful were things like the Empathy Library. I don't know if you know about the Royal Society of Arts There are lots of talks and lectures on empathy. There's the Charter for Compassion. There's the website against violent extremism. There's lots of stuff from the peace movement that deals with conflict management. And hopefully, at the end of the project, that's what we'll be able to share. Thank you.